of what we see as the financial institution practice of the world. And I'm going to give you an estimate on when that's going to happen. It's going to happen in 2008. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why I think that's a pretty good bet. The reason I think it's a pretty good bet is because a few years ago we decided to prop up our economy. Now, I'm not going to point fingers at, Treasury secretaries or anybody in that kind of environment. Seriously, I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just saying we did a very interesting thing. We decided that we had a very dynamic need in 2001 to get our economy back on track. And so what we did was we poured a significant amount of capital into what market? What market in 2001 wound up contributing to the majority of the growth of the GDP in 2001? What market? Housing. Housing. 90% of the growth of the GDP in 2001 to 2002 was in the housing market. %. Did we all get, castles? Are we Europe? I mean, did we all, move into castles in 2001? It is bigger than 86%, isn't it? Did we do that? What did we do with that alleged housing market money? Now, huh? We bought our consumer product stuff with our housing market. Now, there's a very interesting statistic that you can trace from 1938 to present, and that is the default rate between consumer debt and mortgage debt. They're not the same, by the way. One of them is significantly greater than the other. One of them has accelerated at a considerably greater pace than the other. Insolvency in one has been much greater than insolvency in another. But what we did in 2001 is we decided that we were really bummed out about certain things that we were legitimately bummed out about. And so to get ourselves out of being bummed out, we'd spend. And we spent a lot. We bought a bunch of cars, and we bought a bunch of iPods, and we bought a bunch of flat screen TVs, and we bought a bunch of things. And we did all that because it made us feel better about ourselves. And then in 2002, we realized that, hold on a second, we'd done all that stuff, but now we actually had a lot of consumer credit. So what we did was that's right, put more money into the housing market. And just hang with me, because all this made perfect sense then. Okay? And it still all makes perfect sense now. So we put more money in the housing market. And we put more money in the housing market, and lo and behold, it looked like we're really on track. Consumer confidence is really high. We're really doing well. We're buying durable goods. We're getting those cool refrigerators that make ice and tell us the weather and do all that good stuff. It's really awesome, and it's all happening, and it's really exciting, and we're spending more and more and more. And what are we doing when we run out of money? That's right. We're going back and saying, holy cow, look at the capital gains on my house. I can go and get more debt. Something happened last year. I don't know if any of you were watching, but something happened last year. For the first time since 1933, does anybody know what significant financial function happened last year? Not only inverted growth, but for the first time since 1933, and that's true, but since the first time since 1933, something very interesting happened. We actually went negative in savings. Negative in savings. We had a 4% in one calendar year, a 4% reduction in savings. That meant for every dollar you earned, you spent $1.04. That's for those of you who were saving. Important, listen to what I'm saying. This is not funny. That's for the people who were saving. For the people who weren't saving, which is a statistic that for some reason never quite hit the press, we actually had 120% spend over earn in 2005. For every dollar you earned, you spent $1.20. Now, was that in the housing market? Is that where that went? Into our houses? No. It went into more consumer spending. And while the Fed started talking about, gosh, we're getting a little queasy about this whole growth trajectory and we're seeing the lines start to flatten and everything, we're not really worried about it because we're going to eke out a little more consumer credit. And so what we did was we actually decided that we'd add $1.8 trillion in the last quarter of last year that was entirely leveraged commercial consumption. $1 trillion in a quarter. I don't know where you come from, but I come from like rural southeast Pennsylvania and California and places like that. 1 point something trillion is actually a big number to me. And I understand that some people can get their arms around 1.7 trillion or 1.3 trillion or 1 point something trillion. But it's the trillion that gets in my way. That's a big number. And I have problems when I get to trillion things. Those are big. We outspent and overshot our GDP. That's pretty cool. And it felt pretty good. Christmas looked all right, a little slow. If you were Tickle Me Elmo, it wasn't quite a good year for Tickle Me Elmo, but by and large we were doing okay at Christmas. Now here's a very fascinating statistic that our company kind of teased out of financial data in 1998, and I actually am honored to have in the room one of the gentlemen from my organization that helped us find that number, and that's David Farron. Raise your hand back there. David Farron and I were very interested in looking at historical default rates, and we were looking at different types of credit and different types of defaults, and one of the things we were looking for is whether or not default rates happen in normal curves, whether you're as likely to default month 1 as month 12, as month 24, as month 36, as month... And you know what? It's not very linear. Debt actually looks like it works really well for about 14 months. And if you look past 14 months, and you go out a little further and you go to about 17 months, you actually find out that debt starts feeling a little squirrely. That's when you start not making your payments. That's where you get into things like technical defaults and these kinds of little bumps in the road. You try to make a payment, you can't make a payment, you can't this, you can't that, and so all this. But somewhere between the 17th month and the 24th month, all of a sudden, the fecal matter hits the rotary oscillator, and it's bad. Everything that looked like a good credit starts to look like a bad credit. So let's see, Christmas of 2005... January 2006 is kind of when we overextended our credit. So let's see, 17 to 24 months would put us in January 2008. Wouldn't it? The day that banks have to report their capital adequacy happens to be that magical day when a new president gets sworn in. Oh, hold on a second. That actually was kind of funny, wasn't it? Ladies and gentlemen.
Was there a military outcome?
Yes, there is. And it's worse than just a military outcome. Could 1815 happen again? Could we find ourselves in a situation, and here's where the challenge is today. Because one of the things I hate, and I got this hatred from my mother, and if you know my mother, you'll find a great deal of fondness in me saying that my mother gave me anything of hatred. But that was kidding. Well, it may not have been all kidding, but it was somewhat kidding. My mother said she hated anthropologists. And the reason she hated anthropologists was because they could tell you what's wrong with civilization and what's wrong with cultures and why they fell apart. But they weren't a damn bit of good telling you how to fix it. So in the interest of paying homage to my mother, I thought I shouldn't just talk about January 2008 as though, gosh, it could be a really bad January. But it could be a really bad January. But in the interest of my mom, I thought maybe we could think about, well, what really will happen in January 2008? And now I'd like to put in the caveat that every accounting firm that is still in operation then, we currently have the Big Four. I'm holding out that we can keep Big Four, but, you know, my bet is on maybe we might get to 3. Maybe. Little tax issues here and there. Don't know. But we have 4 big accounting firms, and long about January of 2008, we still might have Big Four accounting firms, and they still might be in a position to actually go into financial institutions and say, we've got your Basel II solution. I like the word solution. It's a really cool word, and it's how people sell cool things, consulting services and IT systems and everything else. And people will be selling Basel II solutions, and those Basel II solutions will be ways in which you can comply with, well, maybe not comply with, but get ready to comply with. Okay, maybe not get ready to comply with, but at least say you have a program that's trying to comply with Basel II. And so, somewhere around middle of 2007, we should have this wonderful program going on where people walk in going, we can help you be compliant with Basel II, and somebody will have a job. It'll be a business card. You'll have your compliance officer for Basel II, and somebody's going to be a managing director of compliance for Basel II in every bank and in every insurance company and every securities firm. It'll be really exciting. There's a whole new career. I highly recommend it if you have a short career horizon. Lasts about through 2008, third quarter. But between now and then, there's a lot of money to be made. So somebody in this room should be bright enough to figure out how to print up those business cards and hand them out, and we can all be Basel II experts when we walk out the door and go sell our services. So what would happen if banks don't know what their exposure is, but something close to 3/4 of their exposure right now is in the housing market? But the housing market isn't housing market, it's consumer credit being called housing, but it's not really housing, it's consumer credit. That's pretty interesting. We're talking food lines, bread lines, lines at the gas pump. We're talking where's Carter when we need him. That was really mean. I'm sorry. I actually like Jimmy Carter. I've been to his house.
When you say consumer credit, you're talking about on washing machines?
I'm talking about durable goods. I'm talking about iPods. I'm talking about going out to TGI Fridays. I'm talking about every time you ring.
But not 30 or more.
Oh, no, because the mortgage, remember, the mortgage that's in that, well, the good news, and thanks for giving me this, because the good news is that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are all there for us because they're government insured. Bam! That's why it's not going to happen. That's government insured. And who bought those? Oh, that was the Federal Reserve. So that's good. And they're the ones that bought the collateralized mortgage obligations, which aren't mortgage obligations.